We are live. Welcome back to the MMA Sucker podcast. My name is Fraser Crone, and let's not beat around the bush. Let's not waste any more time. UFC 305, now one for the books. And if you hadn't noticed already, and if you didn't already know, Dricus du Plessis is legitimate. The South African champion of the middleweight division is legit. Dricus du Plessis defeats Israel Adesanya in the main event of UFC 305 in Perth, Western Australia. Doesn't just beat him, he finishes Israel Adesanya in the fourth round after a competitive back and forth opening sort of, let's say, well, it was a competitive 15 minutes. But Dricus du Plessis owned the night. He deserved all the plaudits that he got. More importantly, is he won fight week. He wasn't overawed by the situation of stepping in there against Stylebender, who, let's be honest, is a massive, massive star. Israel Adesanya. Dricus du Plessis didn't care. He made him, he got into his head at the press conference. He made him upset. He then goes in there on Saturday night and does exactly what a lot of people thought that he would do, but not many people thought that he would do it in the fashion in which he did. What can we learn about Dricus du Plessis from this fight? A lot of stuff that we already knew. We can't read anything into his body language. He always looks tired. He's possibly getting absolutely rocked by a lot of the shots that have landed on him, and yet he comes through. He does really well. He is one of these fighters that prospers in chaos, which is not an easy thing to do at all. And it's something that we gave his opponent Israel Adesanya a lot of props for in the past. When Alex Pereira was opening up on Israel Adesanya in their rematch, Israel Adesanya was able to keep calm in the chaos, pick his shots, and knock Alex Pereira out. Dricus du Plessis is able to keep calm in the chaos of the fight, land 2, 3, 4, 5 punches at once, rock Adesanya on multiple occasions, essentially drop him, go to the back, grab the rear naked choke, adjust the grip on the rear naked choke, and submit Israel Adesanya. It was a really, really solid performance by Dricus du Plessis. I actually had him 2-1 up going into that fourth round anyway. The first round was close. I think Dricus landed the more damaging shots. He landed the higher volume of shots. The second round, definitely a Dricus round. Three takedowns, 3.5 minutes of control time. Third round, sorry. It definitely picked up in the sort of later stages of the round, but I do think that was a Dricus du Plessis round. Yeah, I do think that was a Dricus du Plessis round because of an Israel Adesanya round. Sorry. I think Dricus kind of had the third round off a little bit. He didn't throw an awful lot at the beginning of the round. Like I say, he definitely picked up in the latter stage of the round, but he wasn't throwing an awful lot. And then that fourth round, when he submitted Israel Adesanya, just kind of proved that he's got that dog in him that we all thought that he did anyway, but it just really, really proved it. What was so interesting for me is that yet again, Israel Adesanya didn't quite look. We're so used to seeing Israel Adesanya just dominate his opponents. If we go down the record of Israel Adesanya since, I did it on the last episode, but, you know, dominates Marvin Vettori over 5 rounds, dominates Robert Whittaker over 5 rounds, dominates Jared Cannonier over 5 rounds. You know, going back as far as, even in his early career, Brad Tavares dominated him over 5 rounds, finished Derek Brunson. Let's be honest, dominated Anderson Silva, went to war with Calvin Gastelum, knocked out Robert Whittaker. But I think it's the Marvin Vettori, Robert Whittaker, Jared Cannonier fights where he's just so calm, cool, and collected. He barely works up a sweat in those fights. and this was against some of the better guys in the division at the time. Of course, they all are because they get title shots. But Marvin Vettori, we all thought that he would give Israel Adesanya a much tougher night than he did. Robert Whittaker, of course, we thought Robert Whittaker would give Izzy a tough night, and the same with Jared Cannonier. We thought he'd bring something a little bit different to the fight. And yet, Dricus du Plessis did bring something different. He brought a distinct lack of respect to the fight for Israel Adesanya striking, because Israel Adesanya was landing some really good body kicks, some really good body strikes, good leg kicks, and he was landing the uppercuts on Dricus throughout the fight. And I don't know what it is about Dricus du Plessis, but he looks like one of these guys that is unknockoutable. Now, I know that he's been finished, and he's been finished in KSW, and obviously that's outside of the UFC. But Israel Adesanya was constantly landing on Dricus's chin, and it just didn't really seem to be affecting the South African, which is extremely impressive. But Dricus was landing a lot of good shots of his own. I think the thing is with Dricus is, again and yet again, we'll say it, if you're teaching someone how to strike, never show them a Dricus du Plessis fight, because that is not how you strike. You don't essentially blitz forward with your chin up in the air. You don't, throw a leg kick, and he doesn't really seem to commit to the leg kick. You don't sort of throw a body kick and then snap the foot out. Yeah, everything that Dricus du Plessis does shouldn't work, and it does work, and it works to great effect because he is the middleweight champion of the world. And now we've got to ask the question, who beats Dricus? Because he's already beaten Israel Adesanya now, finished him. Sean Strickland defeated him by decision. Robert Whittaker finished him. Khamzat Chimaev gasses after round 1 or 2. That's probably going to, there's a potential that's a fight further down the line between Khamzat Chimaev and Dricus du Plessis. But Khamzat Chimaev gasses after like I said, after 10 minutes, Khamzat Chimaev is gasping for air, whereas Dricus du Plessis will continue to walk forward. I think Robert Whittaker's got a good chance against Dricus. Obviously, we didn't see it in their original fight, and I think Sean Strickland's got a good chance again against Dricus, and I think that's probably the fight that's going to be made next. But if anything, that fight needs to be made in South Africa. No questions asked. Beginning of next year, South Africa, big press tour for it. Get in and around South Africa. Go out there weeks before, get a really dive into Dricus du Plessis' backstory, because I think the Dricus du Plessis backstory will be really interesting. I can't lie and pretend that I know an awful lot about Dricus. I know that obviously, he had to vacate South Africa, the local area, to go and get tougher fights. He had to travel to, I think he traveled to Poland first. Yeah, look, he was 11-1, and he was the EFC, I think it's Eternal, Extreme Fighting Championship, welterweight and middleweight title holder. He then had to go to KSW, to Poland. He won the welterweight championship on his debut, and then he did lose it, but then he went back. He fought for KSW again. He then fought for EFC again. Then he joined the UFC, and he's undefeated, as we know, in the UFC with plenty of finishes. 2 of his fights have gone to decision, and the rest have been finishes. He knocked out Marcus Perez, knocked out Trevin Giles, went to a decision with Brad Tavares, submitted Darren Till, TKO'd Derek Brunson, TKO'd Robert Whittaker, went to a split decision and won against Sean Strickland, and now submits Israel Adesanya. He's still only 30 years old. He's a very strange one, Dricus du Plessis. For me, I think he's one of the most mentally strong champions that we have in the UFC. He wants to put on a show, and to go to Perth in your first title defense, essentially in your opponent's backyard, not bothered. And now you have to reward Dricus du Plessis with a South African homecoming fight, in my opinion. And I think, I mean, of course it'll sell out, and I think Sean Strickland is potentially a good opponent to sell out against. For Israel Adesanya, what's next? Obviously, we didn't see him retire. There was a good chance that we did see him retire, but we didn't see him retire. I think he's had 12 straight UFC title fights. That's taxing both mentally and physically. So what's next for Izzy? Of course, he's on the back of two losses now. He needs at least, in my opinion, two wins to get back to where he wants to be. And can he put together two wins? He's what, 35, 36 now? He can put the wins back together, but will he make it to the real pinnacle of the sport where he wants to be again? I'm not so sure that he will. For me, the next fight for him would probably be someone like Nasruddin Imanov. Sean Strickland is more than likely going to get the next title shot. Robert Whittaker faces Khamzat Chimaev. And then you're looking at Imavov. I've no interest in the Jared Cannonier fight. I've no interest in the Vettori fight. I think is Brendan Allen booked. But that's a tough fight. That's a tough fight for Izzy. It's a tough fight for anyone. Oh, so Brendan Allen is facing Imavov, of course, in Paris. So is that one in Paris? Let me just double check. Yeah, that one is in Paris. So yeah, the winner of that one's the potential, but I don't want to see Izzy sit out for too long. If he's not going to retire, get back in there as soon as possible, because I think that there's maybe an acceptance that he won't be middleweight champion again, but he certainly needs to stay as active as possible. Let me just change this back because we're going to talk about the co-main event. Pretty briefly, I'm going to talk about the co-main event because the fight only lasted for 4 minutes. Steve Erceg was doing really well. He really was. I thought he was landing a lot of the bigger shots on Kai Kara France. But there's always the threat with Kai Kara France. His nickname is one of the most apt in the business. Don't blink. And the reason that is his nickname is because you can't blink with Kai Kara France. He landed a beautiful step through overhand, and it landed on Steve Erceg and rocked Steve Erceg. He got back to his feet, and he wasn't. He got back to his feet. He wasn't all there, Steve Erceg, and Kai Kara France finished it. And that was a big, big win for Kai Kara France because he was without a win since March 2022. He was without a finish since he finished Cody Garbrandt in December of 2021. But then you look at the guys that Kai Kara France has lost to, in the UFC, this is Brandon Moreno back in 2019, Brandon Royval in 2020, Brandon Moreno again, I think that was for the interim title, and then Amir Albazi, who is at the top of the division. Don't know where he's at the moment with injuries and whatnot, but he is at the top of the division. There's no denying that. Yes, Kai Kara France has lost to these guys, but the reason that he has lost to these guys is because they're all legit. And there's no shame in losing to the guys that he did lose to. But now for me, let's go. Let's book I say rebook, but let's book the Pantoja. I guess it is a rematch of sorts because the guys faced off in the Tough House. But let's book that because if you look at the flyweight rankings, Brandon Royval, I'm pretty sure he's only recently lost to Alejandro Pantoja to UFC 296 December of last year. Recently lost. Brandon Moreno taking time away from the sport after he lost to Brandon Royval. You've then got Amir Albazi. Well, where's he at? Where's Amir Albazi? Realistically, Albazi's the next one in line for Pantoja, but we don't know where Amir Albazi is. I haven't heard from him for, I think, since he beat Kai Kara France. and then it drops down to Cara France. Book that fight for the end of the year because that is the fight to make. And for Steve Erceg, you're coming off a very good title challenge. Didn't go your way on the night. You're still a contender in the division without a doubt. He does drop a place to eighth. Nicolau takes his place at seventh. I think that's probably the fight to make, Nicolau versus Steve Erceg. But moving on, fight of the night, Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot. What a fun fight this was. Mateusz Gamrot, I had him to absolutely dominate Dan Hooker. I'm not going to lie. I thought he would out wrestle Dan Hooker. I thought that he would be able to dominate and just hold Dan Hooker down, who's sometimes guilty of just being comfortable. In my opinion, I think he's guilty of just being comfortable on the floor, on his back. But that wasn't the case. Dan Hooker, throughout the entire fight, especially in the end of the second round and the entirety of the third round, whenever he was taken down, he was threatening the guillotine. Phenomenal stuff. But I think it all comes down to that first round. How none of those guys was credited with a knockdown, I'm not really sure. But that first round, it's a tough one to score, without a doubt. The whole fight is a tough one to score. But for me, I think I scored it for I scored it for Dan Hooker. And the reason for that is because it's about clean, effective work. It's about clean, effective damage. And Dan Hooker did the damage in that round. Yes, physically, he maybe looked like Gamrot did the more damage because Dan Hooker was cut and bruised. But you think about some of the wars that Dan Hooker's been in, you can't. It's difficult. You've got to take into account the individual in the fight. You know, you look at Nate Diaz, you look at Nick Diaz, they begin to bleed. It's the same with Michael Chandler. You breathe a little bit too close to Michael Chandler, he's going to bust open. And unfortunately for Dan Hooker, that's the same with Dan Hooker. He's got so much scar tissue now from these wars that he's had with Paul Felder, with Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier is another one, got a lot of scar tissue. You even look at these guys in the wrong way and they'll probably be busted open. So although Gamrot was landing, and Gamrot looked good on the feet, he definitely showed improvements on his feet. You can't read too much into Dan Hooker being cut open, in my opinion. The difficulty is for me, if I'm Mateusz Gamrot, is I've got a lot of control time in each round. I've cut Dan Hooker, I've hurt Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's hurt me. But Dan Hooker, every time either he was taken down or he defended a takedown, he did not take a single step backwards. His cardio, his conditioning was phenomenal. And I mean phenomenal. There was not a single time that he allowed Gamrot to rest in the fight. And I think that surprised Gamrot a little bit. I think Gamrot thought, if I get a takedown, I'll be able to rest on the ground. But Dan Hooker didn't allow him to rest on the ground. I think Gamrot maybe thought that if he got a takedown, he'd be able to. And Dan Hooker popped back to his feet. Dan Hooker would look for a little bit of separation to sort of get back on his game. Dan Hooker didn't allow him to. He was constantly in the face of Gamrot, and he was landing some heavy, heavy shots. And that's you know, fair play to Dan Hooker because that is a tough thing to do, and it's a ballsy thing to do. Um, he needed to quite literally stay in the fight, stay in the fire to be able to be able to win the fight, to be able to really knock Mateusz Gamrot off his game. He did just that, and it was a phenomenal performance. Yes, it was a close fight, but I believe that the right man won. And now you've got to ask what's next for each man because I feel for Mateusz Gamrot because for me it seemed like a lose-lose situation for Gamrot. What was he gaining out of winning that fight? He wasn't going to jump ahead of Dustin Poirier he was ranked number 5. He wasn't going to jump ahead of Dustin Poirier to number 4, and then what? Does he face a Justin Gaethje next? Probably not. Does he face a Charles Oliveira next? Probably not. He now drops 3 places to number 8. Dan Hooker jumps to number 6. And are you trying to tell me you wouldn't watch Dan Hooker versus Dustin Poirier too? Or Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaethje? Or Dan Hooker versus Charles Oliveira? I'd watch all of those fights. I'd pay for all of those fights. I think they're all phenomenal. That's the disappointing thing if you're Mateo Scamrot, is that Dan Hooker has just stole your opportunity with a better performance on the night. Heavyweights, I'm not going to touch too much on it because, in my opinion, heavyweight should never go the distance. Jairzinho Rosenstruck stayed at range, picked off Tai Tuivasa at range, and made it it's quite an easy fight. The judge that scored the all three rounds for Tai Tuivasa was obviously pulled off the judging of the co-main event. I think that must have been a clerical error, because why else? How he scored any round for Tai Tuivasa, let alone all three, was embarrassing, for want of a better phrase. I'm going to come back to Carlos Prates. Volta Walker, weird fight, verbal tap. We've seen it happen before with Danny Roberts. That's just one that comes to mind. We've seen it happen before in the UFC. Verbal taps are taps. You can't yell out in pain and expect the referee not to stop the fight. So Junior Taffa, I don't really, I'm not really sure what he was really, thinking, why he was so pissed off. Ricardo Ramos picked up a good win. This is a strange one for me. I actually scored the fight for Josh Culibao. I can't understand how you can outland your opponent 3-1, knock your opponent down. I think it was was it the second round that he knocked him down? Yeah, it was in the second round. Outland your opponent that heavily, and just and damaging shots do count for more. But I scored it for Josh. Casey O'Neill got back in the win column, and I thought it was a really good win by Casey O'Neill. I thought she did exactly what she needed to do. Tough fight. I picked her to lose this fight to Luana Santos. She looked much better on the feet. She still is not very defensively aware, which is something that if I'm her coach, I need her to work on, because offensively she's very good. Defensively, I think she's quite poor. That obviously got her in trouble against Jennifer Maia. It got her in trouble big time against Ariane Lipski. Yes, she was submitted against Ariane Lipski, but she was out on her feet before that. And even now against Luana Santos, Santos landed with relative ease on Casey O'Neill. If I'm Casey O'Neill's coach, I say offensively, very good. Not very good. Offensively, solid. Defensively, let's work on it. Let's work on getting your hands up a lot higher. And when you are throwing shots, let's think about cutting the angle after you finish a combination, because it's on the end of a combination that she tends to get caught. But, she got back in the win column. She cemented, I think she will have, yeah, she cemented her place at number 15 in the flyweight division. It's an uphill battle for Casey O'Neill in that flyweight division. I'm just going to quickly pop onto Tapology and see what flyweights have got fights booked, because it's a tough division from top to bottom. It's a really, it's a solid division. Flyweights. Give me a second. So Casey O'Neill she's ranked number 15 in the UFC. She's ranked number 17 on Tapology. She's gonna want to look to fight up now, because she took the fight against a girl who wasn't in the top 15. I agree. I think that's the right thing to do. But like I said, it's not going to be easy for Casey O'Neill. If she chooses to fight someone outside of the rankings, there's a little bit of beef there with Veronica Hardy from back in the day. That could be a fun fight. I don't think that's the one that they'll make. I can see them making a Tracy Cortez fight. And the reason for that is Cortez will look to wrestle with Casey O'Neill. Casey O'Neill's very good on the floor. Cortez is coming off a loss. She's ranked number 12. Casey O'Neill ranked number 15. Potentially, we could look at running that one. We've got Ariane De Silva or Ariane Lipski. She's facing Jasmine Jasdavicius. That's number 13 and number 14. Vivian Araujo isn't booked, but that's a very, very tough fight for Casey O'Neill. So Casey, for me, either looks to fight outside of the rankings Veronica Hardy is more than likely a good bet, as it were. Um, just trying to look now. We haven't really got anyone, maybe they rebook the Trezor Blader fight, but now that one doesn't make so much sense because Casey O'Neill's coming off a win. So it's good for Casey O'Neill to have got back in that win column. But for me, the performance of the night, the standout moment, Carlos Prates. And now I picked Li Jingliang to win this one, and Carlos Prates battered Li Jingliang, knocked him down twice, and was guilty of looking for the one hitter quitter, one punch knockout. I say guilty because that's exactly what he was doing. Was it a bad thing? Absolutely not, because what he delivered was one of the most brutal one punch knockouts we've seen in a long, long time. That for me is up there with knockout of the year. Yes, it's not Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje, but what it is one of the most slick, skillful, technical knockouts that you're going to see. And the reason for that is because he was landing the left hand all night. And the way that he mixed it up to then go to the screw uppercut, phenomenal from Prates. And now we need to talk about Prates being up and around the sort of higher end of the division. He's ranked. He's not ranked. Sorry. I don't think he won't be ranked. Yeah, he's not ranked. He's not ranked. But we need to talk about him being ranked. And the reason for that, he called out Chaos Williams. For me, with respect to Chaos Williams, let's give him a ranked opponent. He's on a crazy win streak at the moment. Um, just looking down his record now. Since 2021, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights. 9 fights since 2021. All of them wins. All of them knockout. All of them finishes. All of them knockouts. In the UFC, he faced Mitch Ramirez from on the Contender Series, knockout. Trevin Giles, knockout in the second round. Charles Radicki, knockout in the first round. Li Jingliang now, knockout in the first round. In the second round, sorry. Let's get him a ranked opponent. And for me, his striking style is one of the best striking styles to watch in the UFC today. And now the person that I want him to face, and it might be a massive step up in competition, but what a fight it would be and what a striking match it would be Carlos Prates versus Michael Venom Page. Now, Michael Venom Page is 2-0 in the UFC. 1-1 in the UFC. Beat Kevin Holland, lost to Ian Gary. He's ranked. What's he ranked? He's ranked number 14, so he's right on the edge of the welterweight division. Book that fight because that is a stand-up battle that I want to see. It won't be made, I don't think, but I think it would be a really good fight. That's UFC 305. I just want to go on to talk about UFC 307 briefly. We've got a video on the channel at the moment. I think Jeremy reacted to the announcement that Khalil Roundtree Jr. will be facing Alex Pereira for the UFC Light Heavyweight Championship of the world. In the co-main event, we will have Raquel Pennington making the first defense of her bantamweight title against former champion Juliana Pena on that card as well. We've got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson facing Joaquin Buckley, that is a great fight. I think that's a really interesting one. We also have announced Movsar Evelev, obviously, against Aljamain Sterling. We knew that one before. Jose Aldo Jr. still on this renaissance of a career against Mario Bautista, and a fan favorite, an MMA Sucker podcast favorite in Kayla Harrison faces Ketlin Vieira for what is inevitably a title eliminator. And the UFC aren't stupid. They've put that fight on the card, on the same card as the bantamweight title. That goes down in on October the 5th. Now you've got pretty much a full card already announced. You've got 10 fights. You've also got Kevin Holland against Roman Dolidze. Just want to talk about the main event and the co-main event, really. I'll obviously go into much more detail on the fight closer to the time. But we're best part of 2 months away at the moment, so I won't be doing that just yet. But main event, I don't mind it. I really don't mind it. And this is ironic for me because I'm a person that, and long time listeners to the podcast will always know that I think that the best should fight the best. The most deserving people in the division should fight the most deserving people in the division. Sorry, should fight for the title. You've got the champion Alex Pereira, who is coming off one of the better performances, probably the best, in my opinion, performance of his career when he knocked out Jiri Prochazka in that second round. He's already competed twice this year. He'll be looking to go 3-0 in this year in title fights. If he does it against Khalil Rountree Jr., which the odds would suggest, I think he's going to be a huge favorite going into that one. The odds would suggest that he's probably going to be fighter of the year, male fighter of the year. But you've got Magomed Ankalaev, who is more than deserving of a title shot. He got the title shot against Jan Blachowicz. He went to a split decision draw. He had the no contest against Johnny Walker, and then he finished Johnny Walker. I would like to see that fight. I'm pretty sure I flip-flopped on it, and logically that's the fight to make. It's a tough fight for Alex Pereira because Ankalaev can wrestle, but he prefers to strike. So, it is what it is. Ankalaev versus Rakic is a fight that I don't really understand. Rakic is coming off 2 straight losses, hasn't won a fight since 2021. Ankalaev is going for gold, as it were. What's Jamahal Hill up to these days? He's coming off the knockout loss to Alex Pereira. He was obviously booked to face Khalil Rountree at UFC 303. Rountree was suspended. He was then rescheduled to face Carlos Ulberg. Hill had the injury. Ulberg, I believe, still competed on that card. No, he didn't. Sorry, he didn't compete on that card. He was meant to face Anthony Smith. He then withdrew, and Anthony Smith faced Roman Dolidze. That's correct. It's a little bit of a mess at light heavyweight at the moment. But just going back to that UFC 307 main event, why not? You haven't got a clear contender aside from Magomed Ankalaev, who's booked for a fight. Why not book Alex Pereira versus Khalil Rountree Jr.? Now, I'm not just jumping on the Khalil Rountree Jr. train. He's been one of my favorite fighters since his tough days. He faced Andrew Sanchez in the final of Tough, lost. But if you look down at his last 5 fights, since he lost to Marcin Prachnio by unanimous decision, something's changed. Maybe it's because he married a supermodel. I'm not sure, but something changed. He's got 5 wins on the bounce, 4 by knockout. That knockout of Anthony Smith is something that the UFC can play on repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And they will do, because it is a devastating knockout. As he's standing over Anthony Smith, ready to club him in the face, and he just doesn't, he just pulls the punch. It's a fun fight. And there's always, there's the forever question of what if? What if Khalil Rountree could land on Alex Pereira? I think there's going to be a lot of respect between both guys. We've already had an interview drop today with Khalil Rountree Jr. says, I'm not going to shoot for a takedown. I've never shot for a takedown in my life. In his UFC career, why is he going to start now? Well, absolutely, and I appreciate that from Khalil Rountree Jr. Maybe there's a case that he should maybe just maybe dummy an ankle pick, but we'll see. I don't see him doing that because the kind of guy that he is. I think it's a really fun matchup. I think it's a phenomenal matchup. It's a tough fight. Alex Pereira is going to be a massive favourite stepping into it, and I don't think you'll get many people picking Khalil Rountree Jr. But the best part of this for me is I get to go back and watch all of Khalil Rountree Jr.'s UFC fights, try and look for holes in his game that Alex Pereira can exploit, and likewise look for areas that he thrives in, that he can maybe exploit Alex Pereira. But he's a humongous guy, Khalil Roundtree Jr. I think it's going to make for a really fun fight. Co-main event, I've got no interest in this co-main event because Juliana Pena is not deserving of a title, an immediate title. Her last three fights have now been for the title. The first one, I get. Okay, you're coming off you defeated Sarah McMahon. Amanda Nunes has wiped out the division. You go in there, Amanda Nunes gasses out. She shows you no respect, and you finish her. Absolutely fair play. No problems with that. Probably female fighter of the year that year. I can't remember who I picked. Definitely upset of the year. One of the best performances of the year. The rematch was one of the most embarrassing performances I've ever seen from a supposed champion defending their belt. And if I'm Dana White and the UFC brass, I'm pissed off because you go in there, you talk all this game, and you are not only beaten, but you are embarrassed on the night. Three knockdowns, some of the most amateurish striking that I've ever seen, running forwards with your hand and expecting one of the most devastating punches not to knock you down. You were taken down 6 times out of 8. You controlled for 11 minutes. You're lucky that Amanda Nunes was just playing with her food on that night because you could have got seriously hurt in there, Juliana Pena. 50-45, 50-43, and 50-44, all in favor of Amanda Nunes. And now she gets another rematch. She's been out of the octagon. It will be over 2 years by the time that she returns. I imagine that she's got to have been booked for a fight and just, had to withdraw from injury. Um, no, she was booked for the Nunes trilogy. She withdrew from that, but so she hasn't exactly been, sat out injured the entire time. Now she gets an immediate title shot returning from injury against Raquel Pennington, a woman who put in a very good performance against Mayo Bueno Silva, but is not an entertaining fighter in my opinion. And it's just she hasn't got that knockout power, nor she got the submission game. She's just she just dogs it out, as it were. You're trying to tell me that none of the women in the bantamweight division are more deserving of a title shot than Juliana Pena? I highly doubt it. Now, I think what the UFC want Kayla Harrison to beat Ketlin Vieira, and they want Juliana Pena, who is a far, far, far better trash talker, fight seller than Raquel Pennington, to win that fight. You match the two of them up on the night. You have Kayla Harrison, hopefully, beating Ketlin Vieira, coming out and sitting ringside for whoever wins actually gets in the ring. They're going to hope that it's Juliana Pena because Juliana Pena will sell that fight. That's what the UFC are hoping for. And that is why those two fights are on the same card, in my opinion. Now, the only issue that I have is that card is that those fights are all taking place on the same card. Now, we all love a stacked UFC main event, but let's be a little bit, sensible now. There have been some absolutely dreadful cards this year so far. And they're all in the apex. Lemos versus Jandiroba. God awful card. Tybora versus Spivak 2. God awful card. Namajunas versus Cortez wasn't a great card. Going down as far as, Cannonier versus Imavov. Not really that interested in that main event. Lewis versus Nascimento. I mean, come on. I liked the fight because it had British interest, but Lerone Murphy versus Edson Barboza as a headliner. Come on. We now look ahead this weekend. We've got Jared Cannonier in another UFC main event versus Kyle Bahalo. I think it'll be a really good fight. The actual card isn't too bad. You got Edmund Sharbazi and Neil Magny and Angela Hill on that card. Not a bad fight card. Burns versus Brady. again, not a bad fight card at all. You've got Rong Zhu on that card, who's a great fighter. Matt Schnell, Jessica Andrade. But the point I'm trying to make is, should we not be looking to spread out? We've had, back in the day, we've had Demetrius Johnson defend his flyweight title on a fight night card. We've had TJ Dillashaw defend his title on a fight night card. We've had Conor McGregor headline on a fight, yes, before he was a main star, but should we not be looking to maybe put someone like a Ketlen Vieira versus Kayla Harrison, where the main event has some implication and is guaranteed to be exciting as a fight night main event, instead of a likes of Lewis versus Nascimento? Should we not be looking to maybe even put, because let's be honest, UFC 307 has only got the women's bantamweight title fight on it because it's surrounded by other big cards. Alex Pereira, other big fights. Alex Pereira versus Khalil Roundtree. It's a fun fight and it will sell. People will stay up in the middle of the night to watch that card. They will buy a ticket to the event. Stephen Thompson versus Joaquin Buckley. Fun fight. People will pay to watch that. Jose Aldo, the return of Jose Aldo. People will pay to watch that. Kevin Holland's on the card. People will pay to watch Kevin Holland. They're putting that. Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena could not serve as a main event on a pay-per-view because it won't sell, because no one cares about that fight. So put it as a fight night main event where you don't have to sell a pay-per-view, where people will watch it. And then maybe if one of the women puts in a phenomenal performance, then maybe, they sell you see it in the Apex, you see it for free, not maybe not in the Apex, but you put it as a fight night headliner in an arena. And then you go from there. A month later in November, you've got Blanchfield versus Namajunas in Canada as a headliner. I'm pretty sure Blanchfield isn't Canadian. No, she's from New Jersey. Rose Namajunas isn't. So why not put the bantamweight title back a month as the fight night headliner in Canada? Then you've got, it's. I don't know. I just don't think that is an entertaining fight at all. I don't really see why it's co-main event to such a big card on such a big card. You could have a much better, much more entertaining, much more fan friendly, much more hyped co-main 5 round co-main event between. I mean, even guys and girls on that card. I think who wouldn't want to watch a 5 round co-main event between Jose Aldo and Mario Bautista, or who wouldn't want to watch a 5 round co-main event between Kayla Harrison and Ketlen Vieira? Kayla Harrison's potentially getting a title fight, having never had to go 5 rounds at bantamweight. Does a cardio hold up? There's all these questions. It is what it is. But the moral of the story is UFC 305 is now one for the books. Dricus du Plessis was phenomenal on the night. He deserves to be the reigning defending middleweight champion of the world, and he put on a really good show. UFC 307 is stacked from top to bottom. It is what it is. Khalil Roundtree Jr. versus Alex Pereira is a really fun fight. I haven't previewed this weekend's card that much, but I've spoken about it. I'll be back next week just to talk about that card. And it's now that we've got one pay-per-view in the books, as it were, we're all looking ahead to UFC Noche, UFC 306 on the 15th of September, less than a month away before the fight the fights in the Sphere. Really looking forward to that one, but that's another podcast. Later on this week, guys, I'll have another rescoring controversial decisions out, another episode of that out, and keep it locked to the channel because Jeremy's dropping all sorts of reaction videos. I'm dropping videos all the time, so keep it locked. Subscribe to the MMA Sucker channel because it's exciting times at the moment, and I'll catch you next time, guys. Thanks for listening.